All right, thanks for that introduction, and thank you everyone for taking time out of your day to attend this webinar on what's new in PyCharm 2016.3. We got a lot of things to show. It's going to have a lot of fun, and I'm going to start with my colleague and friend Gary Hawken for PHP Storm. He likes to start off his webinars on what's new by saying, "It's my webinar, and I'm going to show what I want to." And so we're going to show a couple of things about Django in 2016.3. We're going to show some things from the web features that we inherit from the new WebStorm. We're going to show some things from the database features that PyCharm Professional inherits from DataGrip, our IDE for databases. And then on the fun side, for PyCharm and Python, we're going to introduce the new features in a different kind of way. We'll have to see how this goes. We're going to write an actual application. We're going to write a 2D game and try to show some of these features and what they mean in the context of actual Python development. Now, Ernst pointed this out, and I will definitely emphasize this. Please, please, please ask questions. We have the PyCharm development team available in the chat to answer questions. I've worked it out with Dimitri that they handle all the hard questions, all the easy questions come to me. We'll pause every now and then to answer some questions that don't get answered in the chat. So let's begin. We'll start with just demonstrating a couple of things about Django, a couple of things about the web support, a couple of things about the database support before we get into the development. In 2016.3, first in 2016.1, we added a feature for Django so that function-based views which have a form context, we apply some IntelliSense and code intelligence in there. And PyCharm for years has had great Django support, getting better all the time, and this is kind of a reflection of it. So we'll show that. We'll show creating a Django project where during the Create Django project wizard, you can create the remote interpreter and install Django onto a remote site. And if you want to follow along and take a look at some of these features, the PyCharm What's New page talks about this. Create Django projects with remote interpreters and Django forms and class-based views. So we'll go ahead and start on that. I'll go over to a PyCharm. This is a project created from a cookie cutter template. And I added a contact form with two fields in it, name and message. Here is a class-based view in Django that subclasses from form view. And in one of the methods, a validation method, I started the process of pointing at the passed-in instance of the contact form. And if I go ahead and start accessing some attributes out of it, I see that I get autocomplete based on the attributes defined in the form. So this was previously only available for form-based views. It's now available for class-based views. On to the second thing, if I start the process of creating a new project, I create a new Django project. I'm going to call it Remote Django. Ordinarily, you would have to have the interpreter already defined to choose it, and that's a little bit cumbersome if it's a remote interpreter. So during the process of creating, I can say add remote. I have Ubuntu running in parallels on my local machine, so I'm going to connect to it. I'm going to use password authentication. And then when I say OK, it's going to start the process of creating the interpreter, similar to what you would expect from a virtual env. And now that I have my interpreter defined and my remote project location, I could choose to do a little bit more of the Django customization. I'll just accept those defaults, start the create process, open it in a new window, and off goes PyCharm doing its normal remote interpreter stuff, copying stuff over. But in this case, it's not just doing the normal copy stuff over, it's doing the rest of the Django create new Django project wizard and copying the stuff over and installing stuff over there. So as it's going along and doing its work, I can actually connect to the remote Django and run, for example, a migration script that is executing over in my Python in the remote interpreter on my Parallels Ubuntu box. So that is much more convenient for the cases where you want to create a new project on a Docker image or on a remote interpreter or a Vagrant image, etc. So that's our quick tour through the Django features in 2016.3. We'll stop here for any questions. Ernst, do we have any questions that haven't gotten answered yet?
Let me have a quick look for you.
Okay.
We don't have any questions yet.
All right, great. If you do have questions later about the Django features in 2016.3 or even 0.2 or 0.1, feel free to ask them in the chat channel. Onward, web. I'm also the developer advocate for WebStorm, which means I get to sit in front of Angular 2 and its ever-changing universe of micro-releases and dependencies and React and other JavaScript web frameworks. In PyCharm 2016.3, PyCharm Professional, we bundle essentially WebStorm. And you get all the web features of WebStorm, which means, for example, in the WebStorm What's New, WebStorm 2016.3 What's New, you see things about the TypeScript flow language for type checking, new features in TypeScript and ES6, and new this, that, and the other thing. Well, you get all of that in PyCharm. What I'll show in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to show some improvements to the way that we do TypeScript. And then when writing TypeScript, some refactorings that are available that are really convenient. ECMAScript 6, ES6, is becoming really popular. And as you start changing from old style ES5 to ES6, PyCharm and WebStorm can help you automate some of that. And so those are the things that we'll show. Let me go over to PyCharm and bring up that window. So I'm sitting in a project that was generated by Angular CLI, Angular 2's new bootstrapping system. And because I'm in Angular CLI, you can add new components to your project, or new routes, or new different services, facilities, tests, etc., in a controlled way using Angular CLI. And instead of making you go to the command line to do it, we now let you right-click and say New and say Angular CLI. And what this is doing is it's going off and finding all the kinds of things that Angular CLI can help you create, such as a component. And I'm going to call this hello. And then PyCharm will call in Angular CLI for you, generate these new pieces, and then register them at the correct places in your app. So not only did it create a directory called hello with the various pieces in it, it also added in your module a registration. It edited your file, added this hello component and the import for it, and all the mumbo jumbo that you have to do in Angular 2 to wire up your component. So that's a nice feature for PyCharm to be PyCharm Professional to be able to call into Angular CLI for you. Next, this is a TypeScript project. Angular 2 is primarily about TypeScript, and PyCharm and WebStorm have great TypeScript support, not just warning you about errors, but going into refactorings. In 2016.3, in WebStorm 2016.3, there's this new thing in TypeScript 2 called the language service. In 2016.3, in 2016.1, you could use it, you had to turn it on. Now it's on by default. What that means is you can use the features of TypeScript in PyCharm without having PyCharm do the compilation for you. Notice here that the compiler is turned off. So for example, I have my TypeScript tab here. Currently, no errors, but if I put a TypeScript error in, for example, a type that isn't defined, then the TypeScript language service will detect that error, report back to PyCharm, and then PyCharm will put it into the UI for you. That's quite handy. Next up, we have refactorings, and down here I've got an example of a refactoring I might do. I've got a class called watch, which is an implementation of an interface, a TypeScript interface called iClock, which is defined up here. And it has a field called current time, which is a date, but that says date, not time. So maybe my set time, since I'm passing it a date, maybe the set time method should be set date time. So I can do a refactor this, rename. And the cool thing is with our TypeScript support, we now can detect that, hey, this is something that points at an interface. Do you want to change that as well? So yeah, we would like to say set date time, and it updates both of them. And that's a pretty nice feature, especially when you have lots of classes, base classes, interfaces, etc. And this all comes because we have deep code intelligence about all of the code in your project. Next thing that's really convenient, down here we see a warning that says, hey, you know, we're in TypeScript, which means ES6. ES6 has let and const instead of var. Want me to change that for you? Well, you may have this in a lot of places in your project as you're migrating to ES6. Wouldn't it be nice if your IDE gave you some help on that? Wouldn't it be nice if I could go to a menu, we'll just call it code, and go to a menu option, we'll just call that inspect code, and run on your whole project all of the inspections built into PyCharm for analyzing your JavaScript. And then when it runs and finds all kinds of things, it will let you choose which problems to correct. And here I have an example that var should be used instead of let const. Let const should be used instead of var. I click to choose that, and it goes and rewrites that code for me. So that's very handy, being able to look at your entire project. Last thing I want to show is for people writing not just unit tests, but functional tests using Protractor, either in Angular or React or other projects. We now have test runner support for not just Karma, but Protractor. So for example, I am running this Angular 2 application locally, and I can click to run my Protractor test suite. And I have a tool window down here for Protractor, which looks a lot like the Karma or unit test window. It shows me my tests and has all those features about rerunning your tests whenever you type keystrokes, etc. So that's very handy to be able to have first-class support for Protractor, just like we do for Karma. And that is my last point on web stuff that we inherit from WebStorm and PyCharm Professional. And I will pause here for any questions.
Yeah, we do have a couple questions now. What is the shortcut for refactor this on a Mac?
Control T. And Ernst, can I do a little elaboration on that?
Yeah, sure.
I am, as Ernst pointed out, I did my first website in 1993, and I actually got involved in Python in 1992. Let's just say I'm a man of a certain age, and I've reached that point where every new thing that I learned requires me to unlearn an old thing. There's no way you'll ever remember every shortcut in PyCharm. The one shortcut you need to remember is Command-Shift-A to look up actions. And then I can look up refactor, and it will tell me on my platform what is the keystroke. And in this case, it's Control T. All right, next question. Was that it?
That was everything we got for you right now.
All right, great. Okay, on to the next thing that we're just going to be doing a demo of, the database tool in PyCharm Professional, which we inherit from our product called DataGrip, which is an IDE for your database. The kind of thing that you would never think to ask for, and then when it exists, you don't know how you ever lived without it. So this is the what's new in DataGrip 2016.3. I'm going to just show one thing, one of the features, which is bulk editing. So for example, I'm in a project. This is a tutorial I did at PyCon India. It's a Flask project. And as a Flask project, I can click my little play button. And it's going to run the Flask server, and I can bring it up in my browser. I can see I have a to-do list with a first to-do and another to-do. Well, this is pointed at a database. In particular, you're in the way. My webinar controls are in the way. This is the database tool. This is DataGrip inside of PyCharm Professional. Let's put it to work. I have a SQLite file here that I could just drag and drop over here and create a data source. And the data source is getting connected. It's inspecting my database. I can go to one of the tables in there, double click on it, and look at my data. My data has 2 rows in it. With the new database support, I can edit that, go to the next one, edit it, and it still isn't in the database. We're doing bulk editing, so Command Enter submits everything and writes it to the database. Now when I go back to my Flask application and hit reload, I see that I've got those items. Now that you see what I'm talking about, you're not, this is like an earworm. You're not going to forget this ever. The fact that I can come up and I can do queries, I can dump and reload a CSV, I can go and look and visualize all my stuff, all those features that are available in DataGrip are all there for you across all the databases that we support. I will pause here and take any questions that you have for database support.
I don't see any questions about database support.
All right. Let's move on to the Python side. And this is where we start writing an application. We're going to do this in 3 major parts. We're going to kind of get our environment set up for the arcade library and then show these features in 2016.3 and 2016.1. First, in 2016.3, we have some terminal improvements. When you open the terminal, if you have a virtual environment associated with your project, we will activate that for you. And then we have some new features in 2016.1, I believe, on moving around in the terminal, finding text, deleting symbols, moving left and right, etc. In 2016.3, we also understand the new syntax in requirements.txt for what's called extra options on a package. We'll show that in practice with IPython. 2016.1, just as an aside, I say 2016.3 and 2016.3. I'm really trying to switch to 2016.3, so your patience is appreciated. In 2016.1, we supported new fonts which support these things called ligatures, which are different ways to look at certain programming symbols, like not equal is a single character instead of 2 characters. In 2016.3, we bundle one of those fonts so you don't have to go and install it yourself. Also in 2016.3, the Python console got some improvements, understanding indentation, and then cut and paste from the console into a tab. So let's go show these. I'm going to go back to PyCharm and go to my arcade project. And the first thing I'm going to do is the new features related to the terminal. So I'm going to open the terminal, and actually I'll close this and reopen it. Start fresh. We're already in the virtual environment. So if I say which pip, it's getting the pip from the virtual environment that is associated with the project. Let's take a look at that and confirm. My project, excuse me, my project interpreter is a virtual environment inside my project. And that's the one that we get the path from when we're activated. Let me show a mistake I make all the time. The first thing you do with a new project is make sure that your pip and setup tools and wheel packages are all up to date. So let me update them. Pip install dash update. No, that's not what we do. It's upgrade. I make that mistake every single time. Well, Alt back now deletes the symbol to the left. And let's take a look at that handy dandy thing I told you about, Command Shift A. Let me also point out that I turned off Presentation Assistant. My goodness, I should have had that enabled. Command Shift A shows that delete word start is Alt backspace, and that's what I did. So install dash update, and I did Alt backspace, and it should be upgrade. I'll leave another mistake in. I want to update pip, I want to update wheel, I want to update setup tools. And I realized, oh my goodness, I needed a space there. I don't want to hit backspace to get there. I want to hit arrow repeatedly. I can do Command left to jump word at a time. Command right to jump word at a time. So I'll put my space in, run the pip command, and I really want to make sure that wheel worked correctly. I would like to search in the terminal for a string. How do I do that? We now support Command F in the terminal. So I type wheel, and it shows me the places that occurs. So that's good. I know that I'm up to date now for my game. The environment has the correct versions of pip and wheel and setup tools, so I can close the terminal. Next up, I want to work in the Python console. And for writing my game, I kind of like to start by just writing some interactive stuff, get it kind of working, and then move over to a file. A lot of beginners do that. So I'm in the Python console. I can type import arcade. That works. But I notice, well, this is PyCharm's console here. I really would like to use IPython. It's got all these handy, cool features on it. How can I switch to that? Well, I'd like to switch to it in a way that when I reinstall this environment, I get IPython. So that means the requirements file. I'm going to open my requirements file. I'm going to add IPython, and I'm going to add it with this extra options concept of Python packaging. And this says, get me the flavor of IPython called all. And that's going to get me the Jupyter support and all those other kinds of things. And when I do that, I now get PyCharm to tell me, hey, dude, you've got something in your requirements file that's not installed. Do you want to install it? Yes, I do. And we'll take a look real quick at where the requirement support is in PyCharm preferences. Again, I apologize for setting up Presentation Assistant before I started. In Python tools, Python integrated tools, this says that look for a file called requirements.txt in your file for your package requirements file. So that's how I got requirements.txt support for IPython itself. I want to look at the Python console. And there's a default, it's checked by default, an option that says when opening the Python console tool, if you have IPython installed in your environment, in your interpreter, then use it. Do we have it installed in our interpreter? Yes, we do. There it is right there. So now this time, if I restart my console, I see that I've got IPython. How do I know I have IPython? I type the IPython help question, and it tells me all about IPython. So that's a really handy feature. And I'll do a couple more things before coming back for questions, but Ernst, if you have anything that pops up, let me know.
Sure, I do actually have a question for you. Could you show us how to use multi-edit for the database support?
Yeah, sure. Let me go back to the Flask project, and I've got this window open. And what happens is, let's say I come back to this first row and say, for realsies. And I hit enter. Let me make this column wider. Data grip makes you think that this is the new value, but if I go back to the Flask application, I don't see the text that I just added. That's because it's actually stored in the database tool, in quote unquote data grip. We haven't written it to the database. In order to write it to the database, I need to invoke the submit command, the submit action, which is bound to command enter. Oop, nope, I got that wrong. Actually it is command. So I do have Presentation Assistant running down here. I don't know why it didn't show up in the other window. The command enter will take your pending, uncommitted, unwritten changes and write them all at once. Does that answer the question?
Actually, I think they were talking about the feature where you can like edit multiple cells at once.
Okay. That one I haven't gotten into. I only wanted to show one thing from the database support in this. If we go back to, let's see, data grip, you can look at the various features that it has, and I believe, Ernst, do you have that in one of the tip tweets that we did?
I am not sure. I do think we had it in a blog post.
Okay.
So if you...
So it's in the blog post, and how about you and I commit to putting an example of this on the Twitter?
Sounds good. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned, and we'll tweet like soon how to do that.
All right.
Back to you, Paul.
Any other questions so far?
We're working on them. We're working hard on answering them all.
Great. All right. Remember, the easy ones go to me.
Sure thing.
Next up, I want to show about this font ligature thing. So, for example, if I say 1 equals 1, and I say 1 does not equal 2. If you look at the font used for the double equal and the not equal, those are two separate characters. It doesn't look programming-y, if I can make up a word. We have this new support for fonts that make that look more programming-y, and I'd like to enable that in the options. I'm going to enable it both in the editor and the console. So first up, I'll put it in the editor. I'm going to change to the bundled font, Everitt, and this is the font set that supports this concept called ligatures. I'm going to turn that on. And then next, I'm going to go to the console and do the same thing there. I'm going to choose this bundled font called Everitt and turn on ligatures. And when I apply, you'll see that this looks quite different. These two equals look like one symbol, no space in between. And this is a very different looking symbol with a horizontal not equal on it, something that looks like an actual math font. All right, so I'll continue on since there wasn't that much to show on that one. Let's take a look at the Python console and the two features supporting indentation and then supporting cut and paste. So from an indentation perspective, I might make a function called hello that does x equal 1 plus 1, return x. And it's now correctly doing all the indentation support for you. So that's really nice. Next, I want to show cutting and pasting from here. And this is where I'm starting to write my game. And I want to prototype from the command line. I'm going to say import arcade. And I'm going to do arcade.open window, and let's say demo 600 width, 400 height. And Arcade has a method to start your marker for rendering. And to show a feature later on, I'm going to say assign a variable hello world as the title. I'm going to tell Arcade to draw some text. And I'm going to do this in an old style Python old style string formatting with %s, and then substitute in title. And I'm going to put this at the 200 position, and I'm going to make the color of this red. Not readme, not a color. And then I need to arcade.finish render to batch all that work up, and then arcade.run. And I get a window pop up. Red text, kind of in the middle of the screen, etc. So I've got a game. That's pretty cool. Well, I just did all that work. I'd hate to have to retype it up here. So let's cut and paste all of this. Paste it up here. And it fixes up any of the characters like the IPython prompt, any of the ... So for example, if I cut and pasted this, it would remove the ... that marked the indentation. So that's pretty handy. The ability to prototype, cut and paste, and have it do the janitorial work for you. PyCharm's always trying to do the janitorial work for you. So that's really nice. So now I can run this game from up here, and everything is working okay in the normal way of development, and I can go back to my console and close it. All right, I will stop at this point because I've gone over the first set of features, things related to the terminal and the console. Take any questions.
Yeah, we do have a question. Somebody asked, do the extra options and requirements.txt get in the way of running pip install -r requirements.txt on the normal command line?
I believe it works just fine. In fact, I originally planned to do it. I was rehearsing and I was doing it from the command line, so it works fine. The command line pip uses a library, and we use that library, and they both handle the parsing of it. I can't promise that if you've got a really old pip that it will handle it. I don't know when that was introduced into whatever layer of the Python packaging tool chain parses that kind of stuff. So I don't know when that appeared at pip.
All right, and we have another question. How do you switch to the IPython console from the regular Python console?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
How do you switch from the regular Python console to the IPython console?
It's freaking magic. As long as IPython is installed in your interpreter, it will use it. If you don't like that decision, then you go to the preferences and you look for console and you uncheck this box, and it will not use Python or IPython. Otherwise, simply pip install IPython and Python console will use it.
All right, yeah, we are handling all other questions right now, so please keep going.
All right, great. Okay, I'm going to go back to doing some more things in a game. We're going to end this with something that looks a little bit more like a game. We're going to show some 2016.3 features. You make a mistake, you commit, you realize that was a mistake, you want to get rid of that commit, you go Google for 5 hours trying to figure out how to write the git command to undo and fix the history and all that stuff. We do that automatically in 2016.3. Wonderful improvement. Python 3.6 should be out by the end of the year, I believe, according to the roadmap, and PyCharm 2016.3 Community Edition and Professional Edition already support all of it. I've been told all of it. I don't know what all of it means. but when Dimitri and Andre and the team say all of it, they must mean all of it. I'm just going to show F strings and variable annotations for typing. We have some improvements from the debugger in 2016.3 and 2016.1. I'm going to show those. And then the VCS, the version control system tool, has some improvements to the handling of logging. I'm going to show those as well. So here we are. We're going to refactor this game, make it a little bit more gamey. So the first thing I need to do is commit my changes. And working concept. And I'm working along, and I say, hey, you know, that ought to be a single quoted string. And hey, you know, PyCharm will really help me on this. I hit Alt-Enter, as you can see down here, to bring up the available intentions, and it makes it so easy. My double quotes are now single quotes. Like, yeah, baby, this is the most valuable commit ever. And then I think, oh no, the Project Arcade has a style guide of double quotes, not single quotes. Oh my God, that's going to be so embarrassing when that gets out there in the world. Sure wish that I could figure out how to undo that commit. So I go to my version control tool, I go to the log tab, and I clear from my demo that I'm about to show. Oops. And I go to this commit that I just made. I haven't pushed it yet. I go to this commit which I've just made, and I right click on it, and oh my God, OMG, PyCharm is there to save the day. There's an undo commit option, and I undo it, and it's as if it never happened. However, you see up here that it still says double quote, and that's because it's reverted the commit, but it now marks the working set is dirty, so to speak. So I need to revert that change to go back to the way it was before I made the change. All right, so that's a very handy feature. Next up, I want to talk about Python F strings. This is a new way to do formatted strings in Python 3.6. And all you do is you put an F in front. This replaces the %s syntax that's been there forever and ever. It replaces, there is another option for the .format method on strings. And I say, the syntax, it understands the curly brace syntax. I can autocomplete on any symbol that's available in this namespace. And then I remove this, and I run it, and I have Python 3.6 F strings. That was great. Now, that was a little bit of work to convert from the old style to the new style. I showed how from our WebStorm inherited features, we can let PyCharm do the work to convert from old to new. Let's show how we can do the same thing in PyCharm 3.6. Put it back the way it was, click in here, Alt-Enter to bring up the intentions. And we got lots of intentions. We can make the mistake for single quoted, but we can also let PyCharm do the work to convert to this new F string syntax. I choose that intention, and I get the same result that I had to manually do previously. So that's pretty handy. We've got F strings support. Let's talk now about type annotations. And let's switch over to making a little bit more of a real game. I'm going to delete all this. And because I do some of the development of Arcade, I have to write games pretty frequently. I hate typing all that boilerplate. PyCharm has a feature called live templates, and I wrote a live template called Arcade, which will write all of the work for a basic game for me. This is a basic game in Arcade that inherits from the window, does some setup work, makes a player sprite for me, and then handles the onDraw event and the animate event and puts a stub in place for mouse motion. So now I can run this thing, and I get popped up a player and a score, but nothing really moves, nothing really happens on this. So what I'd like to do is fill this in. I'm not going to do too much typing. The point of this isn't to teach you arcade. I'm going to take the player sprite, hit center X, and I'm going to assign it the X that was passed in the new mouse position. Then I'm going to duplicate that line to the Y position and save this. Then when I run it, I move it around, the door of the Explorer follows me around. So that's pretty handy. Let's talk though about the type annotations and the changes in 2016.3. For example, score is an integer, but your users might not know if it's an integer or a float or whatever. Sure, it would be nice if you could make that a lot more explicit. So I'm going to say that this is an integer to give it the type support. And this is a feature of Python 3.6 called variable annotations. Lets you annotate a variable. And it participates in the PEP 484 type hinting for Python. I'm not going to talk too much about Python type hinting. I will only say Python 3 is not doing runtime typing. This is not Java. Don't be afraid. It's all good. I'll show a better example of this, though. I'll look that there. Let's say I'm keeping a running list of scores, and every time the mouse moves, maybe I want to say scores.append self.score. That all works great. And I'm going to get a bunch of integers in there. Maybe I'd want to make it really specific so that we said this is a list of integers. This is a list variable annotation for type hinting. I'm going to have PyCharm generate this import for me. It's a list of integers. And now I want to reformat my code. Down here, if I was to try to append a string, then I would get a warning saying you are putting a string into a list of integers. And I would have to change that to str to make that work. That's variable annotations in Python 3.6, which is now supported in PyCharm 2016.3. I will stop at that point and see if anybody has any questions, just because this is getting a little complicated.
Yeah, actually, how do you make a live template?
How do I make a live template? Ernst, I believe we tweeted that about 12 days ago. So if you want to see it in action, you can go to our Twitter feed. But I'll go ahead and show it real quick. I'm going to go to my list of live templates. And I added a live template here and pasted some text in and named it. If I want to add in the Python context, I don't want a live template for JavaScript. This is for when you're in Python. You click plus, say live template, and you name it, for example, Sprite. Perhaps I want to generate a new arcade sprite. And I can put my text in here, and I can also put in variable placeholders that users of this live template have to type into and fill in as part of the process of creating or using the live template. I can even ship live templates to other people. Does that answer the question?
It does.
All right.
And we're working hard on answering all the other questions, so back to you.
All right, great. While you're working hard, I'm going to do some typing. I was going to automate this away, but I thought at some point you ought to see some typing just to get a feel for this. I'm going to add support for coins that are displayed on the screen that my player goes around and collects to make the score go up. I'm going to use this as an excuse to show the debugger as I'm developing. I might need to to debug, PyCharm is really big on visual debugging, and we hope to be showing more on that later. In 2016.3, add some features to make this better. So I'm going to make a coin list that is an arcade sprite list. I'm going to make 50 coins. I'm going to set their position, and then I'm going to add them to the list of sprites. So bear with me while I do a little bit of coding real quick. This is going to be a coin that's a sprite with an image at this PNG file path that is scaled to be 0.2 of its original size. I'm going to set the center X of it to be random, and I'm going to let PyCharm generate the import this name for me from the standard library. And I'm going to do a random in the range up to 800 the width, and then I'm going to duplicate that and say Y up to 600. And then I'm going to append it to both sprite lists. Then in my animate function, I need to detect that we've hit a sprite and then update the score. Get rid of the sprite and then update the score. So the list of sprites that were hit at this time, did my player hit the coin or anything in the coin list? If so, then for coin or in hit list, I'm going to kill that coin, and I'm going to increase my score. I'm going to show another little PyCharm thing. A lot of times you'll just be lazy and you'll do +1. PyCharm will warn you that you could do this a better way. You can do an in-place assignment. So there we go. So now, hoping that I've done this all correctly, I will run this game. And yeah, as I move around, my coins disappear, my score goes up. What I'd like to show is running this under the debugger so we can kind of see as we go into my game, where am I getting all this stuff from? So I'm going to click on the debugger icon. It will run the exact same run configuration under the debugger. And PyCharm 2016.1 provided some tremendous speed ups by recoding parts of the debugger back in Python. And what I'll do is if you're on Windows, you get these binary compiled parts for free, but if you're on Mac OS or Linux, you have to do so much work. I have to click this link, one whole click, and it will do the work for you to compile the Python extensions for the debugger, which will then give you the speed ups. So it's going off in the background, it's doing its compilation. It's going to add this speed up to the underlying Python, not the virtual environment, but the underlying Python that I'm using. In this case, it's Python 3.6 beta 3 or something like that. It's done its work, so next time I run the debugger, I don't see that message, and it's a lot faster. All right, so great. We've got debugging without a performance penalty. I put a breakpoint here. I'm going to run the debugger again. It's fast because of 2016.1. 2016.3 has a handy feature. A lot of times you set a breakpoint, you stop, and you have just total pollution in your variables pane. Globals and stuff from all over the place. Well, we want you to focus on your application code. And so we tuck all of that away under something called special variables. Right now, at this point, I only have one thing called under class that has everything in it. So the special variables is a new simplified view for your debugger variables. I will stop there and take some questions before showing one more thing in this section.
Yeah, could you show us how to add a test for a function?
I'm going to be showing that in the next section.
That is great. Well, that was
as if somebody read my notes and knew what was coming.
somebody asked just now, can you clarify exactly what code you're Pythonizing?
It is in, I'll type it so that people don't have to look. It's in wherever is your PyCharm installation. Under there, there's a helpers somewhere, PyDev, under PyDev under bundle. And in there, there's going to be a PyDev or under Python, I think, .so on macOS and some other SO files. And if you need to get rid of it, you delete that stuff and it disappears. Next.
That's all we got for you now. We're working on the other questions.
Yeah, one last little part, and then we'll get over to the test running, coverage, and profiling. Probably I'm going to have to speed up a little bit. One last little thing, under version control, I'm working on a project with other people, and somebody did a commit. I want to go remember what that commit was. Ordinarily, I would fire up my browser and go to GitHub. The VCS log view, this tab, now has a much improved filtering. So if I'm looking for something related to window and hit enter, it's a very high speed search, even in very big projects. And I can even narrow it a little bit further by, for example, saying, well, that was Paul Craven that did the thing that I was looking for. Oh, okay, yeah, that's the commit that I'm looking for. Let me go take a look at what he did there. So that's one of the examples, the VCS log speed up and filtering 2016.3, one of those things about practical Python development that we spent a lot of time working on. Should I take any questions or keep going?
You can keep going.
All right, great. Next part is going to be heavy on the questions because we're going to get into some more advanced features. First thing we're going to do is a simple one. Reorganizing your imports to make them conform to the Python style guide is janitorial work. You shouldn't do it. Your tool should do it for you. PyCharm will do it for you, and in 2016.3, it will let you help influence how it does it. If you're writing tests and you're using test coverage, you may notice that PyCharm for a long time has provided a nice button for visual coverage. And we've improved that to warn you with colorizing when you have a branch like an if-then that doesn't have test coverage for one of the branches. So I'll show that in action. Then in profiling with the VMProf profiler, 2016.3 adds support for colorizing your code line by line to show you hotspots. Then, depending on whether Dad kicks me off, if we have enough time, I'll also show NumPy, Array, Pandas, data frames viewing in the debugger. All right, here we go. Optimize imports. Let me close this. At the top, I have an import. Actually, let me put it in an ugly sense. I have an import from one of my dependencies, and then an import from the standard library, and then an unused import. So there are two Python style mistakes here. One is an unused import. Second is Python style is you group all of the imports from Python standard library in one group and alphabetize it. And then you put all your dependencies in another group and alphabetize it. And then you do a group with all the imports from your project. PyCharm has a handy dandy. Remember, that is Command-Shift-A to look up actions. Optimize imports, which is Control-Alt-O. If you do optimize imports, it removed the unused import, and then it ordered it based on Python standard library, then your dependencies. PyCharm 2016.3 lets you influence these under Code Style, Python. The Imports tab has some configuration you can do to customize the way that that works. All right, I'll show this actually in a little bit more thorough of an example. In the arcade source, there's a file called draw commands, and at the top, its imports are messy. I don't want to have to go get the mop and clean up the mess. I want to ask my tool to optimize the imports for me. So it's now redone them as stuff in standard Python, stuff in my dependencies, stuff in my project. All right, I'll move on. If you have any questions about that, we will get to those in just a moment. My game right now is going pretty cool. It keeps score, but I'd like to hide the score to only show the score if I'm not moving. And then I will use that as an excuse to write a test and show test coverage of branches. In my constructor, I'm going to add something that says whether we're moving or not, or whether we're stopped, rather. Oh, and I'll just go ahead and make that a boolean. Probably a better Piglet way to do this, but this is pretty simple without you having to learn anything about it. And then in onDraw, I'm going to say if self.is stopped, show it, and then reset is stopped to true. And then here, while the mouse is moving, say that we're not stopped. And then once we stop, or once we detect that and the mouse stops moving, set it to true. So now when I run this, I don't see the score, I see the score. Cool. That's the kind of thing we ought to really write a test on. PyCharm is really cool because it will write your test for you. And I'm going to test both of those. No, I'm going to create a new test. And I'm going to rename that to game. I've got another file sitting in there that I don't want to overwrite. Yes, I'll add that to version control. And if I run this right now, it fails because I say fail. So I need to start writing my test a little bit. So I'm going to type in some stuff from .game demo import my application. Game equals my application 200 demo, and then game.onDraw. And I want to make an assertion that game.isStopped is true. And then I need to close my game. Now when I run this test, fires up, my test runs okay. Now I'm going to run my test under coverage so that it will collect all that coverage information and display it for me. So the tests run pretty fast. I'm still figuring out coverage. Right now it's going and doing coverage of everything in Python and everything in Piglet, and there's a whole bunch of code that it needs to collect information on. Once I figure out how to do this correctly, this will be a 1-second activity. But it's collecting all that information. And then our visual coverage tool appears and shows us all the coverage information in our project. Now, most importantly, I get coverage displayed in my files showing I've got no coverage there, etc., because my test didn't exercise very much. But most importantly, I've got this little message here saying branch coverage. I had an if, it didn't follow the if, my test didn't go into the if. I need to improve my tests. So I'm going to take this, duplicate it, and say stopped. And I'm going to add a game.isStopped equals false here. I do need to edit my run configuration because it's only pointed at one thing. So now it's pointed at both. Now when I run the coverage again, it's going to run. I'm going to need to fill in a little bit of time about letting it go and generate all the coverage information. But the idea here is we have visual coverage, you click a button, we get a nice display on the screen over here that you can look through your entire project. But more importantly, we will show you in your code using colorizing in the gutter the different parts of your application that have good coverage, no coverage, need more coverage. 2016.3 adds a feature for branch coverage, which now shows I have a test which doesn't have that issue anymore with the branch coverage. I've added a test that went into this if, ran coverage on it, visual coverage shows I'm good. Ernst, I can keep going or let you ask questions.
We actually do have a question for you.
Right.
Can PyCharm make PyTest style tests instead of unit test style?
In fact, in my integrated tools, I said for this project, I'm using no's. I could install a different test runner and use it. For example, PyTest. I'll have to ask maybe you can get them to answer in chat. I don't know if we bundle PyTest or if you have to install it. I think you have to install it because I had to install nodes. But yes, you can have a bundle, or you can set at a project level what is your test runner, or you can go into the run configurations and manually add a test configuration and very specifically say what test runner you want, including lettuce and the behavior tests. Any other questions?
No, thank you. Those were all.
All right, great. Let me clear my coverage information, get this out of the way. All right, next up I want to talk about VM prof line profiling, and I'm going to increase the number of coins to 5,000. I'm going to run this. Oh, no, I need to stop you. I need to run you. And it's going to fire up. I got a lot of coins as I move around. My God, this is slow. What is causing my application to be slow? It's not a mystery. You can use Profiler to help you find what's slow in your game. Traditionally, this has been a problem because the other tools for profiling either give you the information you want but impose such a performance penalty that you can't use them, or they're fast but they're not all that accurate. They're statistical. There's a profiler called VMProf, and if you install it into your interpreter, project interpreter, I have installed VMProf. If it is installed, then PyCharm will use VMProf as its profiler and get the best of both worlds. So now when I click the profiler button, what this will do is it will run my application, but it will run it under the VMProf profiler. And you really won't notice any difference in your speed. It's still slow, but it's not catastrophically slow. And you just go do a whole bunch of normal things. It's collecting information. And now it's saving the information that the profiler output and giving a visual profiling representation of the information. For example, it's going to show you all the branches in your code that it collected information for. And I can zoom in, and I can see different things that took a lot of time. This thing took 99.8% of the time. Well, you know, it called this thing that took 78% of the time. And as we go through these things and see what's taking a long time, I see this thing called, I'm looking for a draw. For example, this took 10.6% of the time. It's one of my commands. So I can right click on this. Oop, I picked the wrong thing. I'm looking for my, let me zoom out a little bit. I'm looking for under draw recs. Oh, here. This took 52.2% of the time. And so if I go to my code, I now see information displayed in my code telling me profiling information. That was 0% of the time. That, on the other hand, was 34% of the time. So that's where my hotspot is. I could even jump into this function and see where is its time going. Well, it's spending a lot of time in draw recs. I'll go to that. And as one of the arcade developers, I look at this and I think, okay, I'm looking at every shape and I'm drawing them independently. I should use a Piglet feature called batches. Group all of my drawing operations into one batch, send them over, and let the graphics card draw them in one shot. So that's how we do visual profiling. And now in 2016.3 with VMProf, we can take the visual profiling over to your code in the gutter, colorizing your hotspots. I'll stop there for any questions before the last point.
We don't have any right now.
All right, good. Let's have a little fun. We're just talking about speed and performance. This is talking to Piglet directly, and it's talking to Piglet with Panda data frames. So I'm going to make something that has 1,000 things in it, and I'm going to run it. And it's pretty fast. Gets up to like 60 frames a second, 55 frames a second. I'll go up to 5,000, which really killed us in the previous example. Well, this is still pretty fast, a lot faster than the other thing, which might not even do 1 frame per second. And then I can even go up to 50,000, run it, and it definitely slows down, but it's not unusable. So where was the win on that? Let's use the debugger to go in and look at the data structures that we're using. Before drawing the batch, I set a breakpoint. And now when I run this under the debugger, and remember I installed those speedups, I see that in the scope of this function, I have something called df, which is a data frame, df, which is a data frame. 2016.3 makes it really easy to visualize this by providing a link at the end of this line in the debugger. I click on View as Data Frame, and I get a nice visualization color-coded in ways that are configurable and columns that can be resized, etc. Part of our Pandas data frame and NumPy array support that we've been adding over the last several releases. All right, with that in mind, I've reached the end. Thanks for watching. I'll take any more questions before turning it back over to you, Ernest.
Yeah, we don't have any questions right now. So thank you very much, Paul. Yeah, so if we didn't get to your question just yet, don't worry. We will answer everything by email soon. If you have any questions later, please also don't hesitate to reach out to us by email or social media. We'll always be there to answer your questions. If you would like to get more information on PyCharm, please go to jetbrains.com/PyCharm. We also would really appreciate to get your feedback on this webinar, so please feel free to send us your feedback on Twitter or in the after webinar survey. The recording will be made available on our YouTube channel soon. If you would like to get more, If you haven't already, please check out our PyCharm blog. On our blog, you can find up-to-date PyCharm news about release and events, in addition to educational resources. So, for example, the recording of this webinar will be published there in a few days. We'll also provide some additional links and information from Paul's presentation over there. This was everything from us today. We'd like to thank you very much for joining us, and we'd like to wish you a great day.